Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to discuss this important topic of diversity and inclusion and what institutional support looks like. We are all aware, I'm sure, there are issues that exist, but the fact that we're all here today, that brings us together, and this makes us realize that we're all here to learn from each other and to support each other and to hopefully make a difference, bring about those conversations that might make change. And I'm excited to introduce our panel today. We have the wonderful Eyeé. She is a product manager at Google. And we have James Faghmous, who is the director of AI at Beauty of All Industries. My name is Shibani Rai, and I'm going to be the moderator today. So let's get straight into it. We are all familiar with, the recent unfortunate story that happened at a leading institution where, someone was fired over the lack of diversity and inclusion, or bringing up that topic about the lack of diversity and inclusion practices. I would like to know what your initial reactions were to that, but also have you been at the personal end of something like that? Have you received personal or professional issues related to inclusivity and diversity?
Well, hey, everybody. I'm James Faghmous. I think, and as a way of background, I am Muslim and North African, and I think that when it comes to the workplace, and people mention coming with your full selves to the workplace. Personally, I think it is really about convenience. When it's convenient for the company that you are your full self, it's great. But once you start pointing out flaws, usually now you become a problematic element. So, I mean, in my case, for example, when George Floyd happened, there were some conversations, and of course, there was a lot of outcry, rightfully so. But then, as that episode sort of faded from memory, when you start pushing to keep going, now you seem problematic. But so where are the commitments that you've made in the past? And so, I think fundamentally, as individuals, it is a choice, of course, but for us to be, uncomfortable in that sense, and also knowing that when the organization is uncomfortable, unfortunately, they might push back. So that's just the reality that we've seen. And including, and when you're talking about sort of equity, fairness in AI, people, when they raise those issues at big companies, they face also backlash if it's not convenient to that company.
+1 to everything that James said. I'm also someone who checks a lot of diversity and inclusion markers. I am Afro-Latina, so I'm Black, I'm Latina, I'm a military veteran, I'm queer, I have different ability levels. And so checking all of those boxes, I feel like in the corporate workplace, right? Not just around it being difficult to have all of my identities represented, but really around finding patience with folks who don't get it, right? Like everyone doesn't understand the nuances of all these different elements of identity. And oftentimes when you're working in a corporate environment, you have to educate people, and that can sometimes feel like a second job. And so something I've really had to build in as a practice for myself is really not taking things personally in order to do the work that I do, to be able to really step up and do work on behalf of the community and my research team at Google that's looking at how we make our algorithms less biased, as well as just being able to really, acknowledge that in a corporate structure, so many people are coming from so many different places and they have their own worldview, and their worldview might not have been built with an understanding of mine. And so, just really trying to find that patience. And sometimes it's testing. I'm really grateful for time off and vacation, but I do know that I've experienced that a lot. It's a lot of like getting people on the same page as to even just things like pronoun usage, or things like, hey, that's actually not funny as a joke, or hey, please don't address me in this way or that way, or hey, like, let's not talk about politics in the office workplace because the way that you're discussing them is actually in a way that's harmful to one or more of my identities.
Such good points. And, there are layers to inclusivity and diversity. There's gender we can talk about, there's skin color we can talk about, there's so much that we can go into, and we all are aware that there are pressing issues right now. But what do you think would be the next steps? So first, I would like for you to address some of the issues that you have probably faced, or someone who's faced those issues, but what are the next steps? What do you think that we can all do on a small level, on a macro level? What can we do to, make the institutions that we work in more inclusive?
I think that the biggest thing, right, is it's a burden as well, as X mentioned, in terms of having to educate people all the time. Like, you don't want to necessarily justify your existence every moment of the day. Like, you still have the same struggles. You have to pay your parking ticket, and you have to eat, and you have to do the same things as everybody else. But then if you still have to also justify your own existence on top of that, it gets exhausting. So I would say the main thing, the first and foremost, is that we don't assume everybody is the same, right? For example, I'm Muslim, I don't drink. So when people say, oh, let's go get drunk, happy hour, I'm like, hey, have fun, guys, I'm leaving. So immediately you exclude people by assuming that everybody likes the same things. But at the same time, especially if you're in a leadership position, you don't want to make it seem like those are accommodations, right? Oh, I'm accommodating that person, because you're still, indirectly, basically, then excluding them if you call it accommodation, as opposed to like, no, this is what we do. We do a variety of things because we are a diverse team and with diverse sets of views. So I think that's the main thing, is just to not assume that you are a homogeneous group, and that can be hard in tech, because especially in purely technical companies, because most people look alike and think alike and sound alike.
Agreed. Another thing that I would really challenge everyone to do is, remember the distance that we've come, right? So I think back to my own personal history, and I think of my grandmother, who was born as a Black woman in the South in the 30s. Her father was a slave who then became a sharecropper and died very shortly after being freed from that. And during my grandmother's time, she was an elementary school teacher, and then she went on to teach through desegregation, and ended up teaching for almost 30 years. And during her time, she wouldn't have ever even been able to have gotten a job at one of these companies, let alone be someone like me who has a Grillin and crazy hand tattoos and be leading an artificial intelligence research team. And I also come from a non-traditional education background. I'm self-taught. I have a GED. I don't have any bachelor's degree or anything like that. And so it can become frustrating when you're in it and it feels like things haven't changed or things haven't shifted, to make you want to leave and seek personal comfort. So I really encourage everyone, if you really want to build diverse institutions, to balance out that desire for personal comfort with generational growth, right? So if we are looking to change these things even more moving forward, even if you do have to leave a company, open the door for someone else to take your spot. When you get ready to leave a position, already start thinking about, who can I set up to take this position on? And when you're able to get into those doors and break those glass ceilings, or get into these institutions, thinking about, how can I bring more people along who will ultimately diversify this? And sometimes that means things like just helping people edit their resumes, helping give people interview tips, right? Helping folks be able to understand the nuances of an organization, or taking that extra 15-minute coffee chat with someone who's new and be like, look, yo, I didn't know this when I joined. This is how you're supposed to do this thing. Here's some politics you should be aware of. Here's how you can set yourself up for success, so that over time, these institutions can continue to change the makeup of who they have hired. And we can't control every element of everything. There might just be a hiring manager who has a bias that they're not even aware of. But the more that we're intentional about keeping those doors open and allowing people to walk in after us, the more we're building on that distance from my grandmother's reality, right? Which wasn't too long ago, where she wasn't even able to use the same bathrooms as certain individuals for most of her life because of her race. And so really thinking about how, again, we can prioritize generational growth, while of course never sacrificing personal comfort or needs, but taking that approach and lens to how you do your work, at least for me, has been radically shifting.
That's amazing to hear. We heard from the lovely Jen during the keynote, where she mentioned what she thinks responsible representative AI means. And, I really liked where she acknowledged moments where she didn't actually reach that point. But, she's trying, and that's the key to take away from here today, I guess, education, and we're all trying. But in your workplace, are there specific examples that you can think of where you have seen, issues? Are there, I think we mentioned before, X, there were algorithms that, specifically don't include every population. Are there examples like that you can think of from your current workplaces or in the past?
Absolutely. So one thing that I just want to address a very common myth, right? In artificial intelligence, people think that if you have the diverse team, that the algorithm all of a sudden won't be racist, right? If you get the right identities, you get a right mix of people, that the algorithm itself is going to magically work for everyone well. And as someone who represents multiple identities, I can say this with extreme confidence that I don't represent the nuances of each of those identities. What the Latino community needs and the range of experiences and the range of beliefs around what is fair or what is right are infinitely dynamic. The same thing with the Black community. There are an infinite need of perspectives and ranges, right? And then even in the queer community, there's so much nuance depending on what you identify as and how you identify across those different identities. And so just slapping me on the team doesn't mean that you've actually done the work to go talk to the Black, Latinx, queer, military veteran community to make sure that your algorithm takes those things into consideration. So one thing that I'll say, just as what I believe the solution is that these companies have to go talk to those communities. When you look at UX research, right? You go do UX research with 10,000 people who identify as African American, and you're going to get a range of experiences of what they do and don't want these systems to have. But I, as one person, can't represent that, right? And I shouldn't represent that. And it shouldn't be my burden to come and say, I know what all Black people want, or I know what all Latinx people want, right? The company should do the work and put the money up to go talk to those communities. Now, examples of where I think algorithms in general are like where I can rattle on for days about these examples. But one really example that really hit home for me was an algorithm that was developed for child protective services. So there is an algorithm in use right now, and I think 13 or 14 different states in the US, that assesses risk. How likely is it that this child is going to be harmed by the current environment that they're in? And that algorithm ultimately can lead to separation of the child from their family. And this becomes really scary. So back in, I think, 2016, 2017, the state of Illinois was using this. And there was a really big incident. You can look this up on your news channels, where, or just Google it, where essentially they had said that I think it was 300 or 400 kids were 100% at risk of basically dying. Now, the majority of these children were Black and Latinx. It turned out that they were 0% correct. None of the children were actually at risk. Now, imagine if the people had just taken that algorithm at the face value and actually removed them from their homes. Thankfully, they didn't. The state of Illinois went on to cancel that contract, but then all these other states are still using that same algorithm, right? Despite the fact that researchers, social scientists, social workers have stepped up and said, this isn't good. Your algorithm's biased. It over-indexes on certain identities and assesses risk for them. And because there are no rules or regulations around artificial intelligence, when they use AI for that, they don't even have to tell you that they're using AI to do that. So you find this in many industries. You find this in healthcare. There was a recent article where they were talking about kidney transplants and how an algorithm was systemically denying Black patients the right to both kidney transplants and to sign up as donors of kidneys, right? And so when you have these algorithms being used to affect our ability to be human, affect our ability to raise our children, affect our ability to receive healthcare services, affect our ability to, access government services, affect our ability to receive home loans, credits, and they don't even have to tell us that an algorithm is making that decision, not a person. We really become powerless to shape the way that these algorithms end up deciding what we do and don't have access to, and they play a large factor in shaping our life. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
We don't even know what we're consuming and what we're facing against. That's really eye-opening, X. James, I have
one thing I wanted to add to that. A couple of things. I think one is the surest way to build a bad algorithm is to have bad data. That's just the nature of the game. And so doesn't matter who's on your team, if the data, and I used to use this term, if we don't have data empathy. Why was the data collected by whom, for what purpose? Because a lot of data scientists, regardless of their background, were taught, downloaded, the internet is a source of infinite data. Let's download it and do it. Go type girl in Google Images right now. You'll see it just shows you all white girls. If you type boy, it'll be all white boys, et cetera, right? This is a common problem. So if you train your model on that data, as X pointed out, well, the model is just not going to know how to handle other things. But one thing that I want to point out to that doesn't get enough visibility is that the types of methods that that are most pressing needs, the methods, the underlying algorithms are not being built to address them. What I mean by that is right now, big tech, unfortunately, dominates the kinds of algorithms that are developed. Can you label an image? Can you tag a speech? Can you identify spam? These are the problems that are pushed by big tech because those are the problems that make them money, right? But then that gets trickled to academia. Academia has to work on those problems because that's what industry cares about. But for example, a problem that is more important, we know, for example, that Black Americans tend to get under-medicated, especially around pain medication compared to whites. Doctors don't believe them that when they say, I am in pain, right? But we don't have algorithms that are developed around causal inference, for example, to really understand, like not a predictive model, but a causal inference model, right? Because there's just not funding. People are not pursuing it because the pressure that you get from big tech to work on problems that's relevant to them. So there we have this problem, like fundamental scientific questions that we just don't have enough brain power working towards, even though they affect so many more people in the world, but we don't tackle them at all. If you look at genetics, we've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on genetic research, but guess what? Most genetic data is for white people. Why? Because it's convenient sampling. Who's going to come to the hospital and volunteer their DNA? It's not going to be a Black person. It's not going to be Native American. It's not going to be a Latinx. It's going to be a white person that lives in Manhattan and just strolls down to the hospital right there, right? And so when you build your model trained on genetic data, it's mostly for white people. And that's just the reality. And so us in this industry, we need to start breaking that, either going, as X mentioned before, maybe breaking from a company and go and start working on your conviction on things that need to be done, or at least having data empathy to say that, why is this data collected? Why are we using it? What kind of biases are going to be introduced into our model? And it's difficult when you're barely trying to fit in, of course. I'm very sympathetic to that, but I think it is a personal choice that each one of us has to make.
Data.
I would love to just add on to what you said as well, James, real quick. I know we're getting ready to wrap up. Plus one, I think someone mentioned in the chat, garbage in, garbage out. I'll give you an example of when the data was good, but the algorithm itself was garbage. So that is a point. And if we focus solely on just the data, which is a huge issue, we miss out on the other elements of algorithm design. So United Healthcare Group had an algorithm that was deciding which patients needed to see a specialist. And they actually had patient records from a diverse background of people, different ages, different gender identities, different geographics, different races, etc. But the point that they used to make the decision in the algorithm didn't make sense. They decided to say, hey, if you've previously spent more money on this condition, then therefore you're more likely to need a specialist. So even though they had a diverse data set, the fact that they chose that as the data point to make the decision had an inherent bias in it that didn't take into account that, to your point, James, that like Latinx people and Black people don't really go to the doctor, and Indigenous people don't go to the doctor for many historical reasons. And they didn't factor that into their thinking, despite the fact that there were African Americans working on that algorithm. There were Latinx folks working on that algorithm. So sometimes it's actually just a data problem. Sometimes we're designing this without taking into the social nuances of what these communities need. And then sometimes it's like, it still wouldn't feel fair. If we had a facial recognition algorithm that was so accurate, it could identify, tell the difference between identical twins, there's still going to be people in the US who say, I don't want a facial recognition system to determine whether or not, police to use body cameras and do facial recognition on me, because I don't think that's fair. So it's nuanced at every layer and every level, and we have to exercise caution and care at every step of the way. What I've seen a lot of in the field is a lot of folks saying, well, I know I got good data, and then they build crappy algorithms. So it's like, good data, the algorithm design needs to take into that same societal context nuance. And then you have to test with people how it feels. Does this feel fair to them? Does this feel like a good use case of it? Even if your algorithm is right in the decisions that it makes, some people might not want that. So yeah, just wanted to plus one, because garbage in, garbage out. Also garbage design, garbage algorithm. Don't talk to people who use it and they don't like it. It's going to feel like garbage as well. So just wanted to add on to that. Loved all your points, James.
Data empathy and actually asking people, what they think about the systems. I really like both those points. We do have to wrap up, but I have one pressing question that I really want to ask you, so maybe we can squeeze that in. We are having these conversations more now. We have to acknowledge them, and in our breakout room, someone did mention this. So, we're trying to do what we can, but at the lower level, maybe we can address that. Do you find that as you climb higher up in the, ladder board, when you're reaching those positions, when you're trying to get a promotion, when you're trying to, hire someone or fire someone, those important points of your career, I guess, are there particular instances where you have, or someone who has, or someone who's spoken out and has tried to make that process a little bit better?
I mean, I'll speak for myself. I mean, I've hired, probably close to hundreds of data scientists in my career, and what I would say is, I just have my own process, and so like it is not popular, and it kind of quote unquote hurts me in first world problem kind of thing. Like I don't hire people quickly. Like my job's people always knocking on my door. Recruiters like, hey man, your job has been open for 99 days. Why haven't you hired anybody? Right. And so my rules, is to really be able to, and that's sort of the cost that I have for me, but it's a small cost, right? I try to explore every possible candidate. As you know, for example, X, if you just put her in that box, oh, you didn't go to MIT and you didn't do an internship at Facebook that summer, throw it away. Like I try not to follow sort of that mold where it is more time consuming, it's more difficult on me, but that's the price that I'm willing to pay to make a difference. And I think it is not necessarily the popular choice, but I think long term, over my career, I think it was the right choice. I haven't been doing this for 15 years. I feel like it has paid off long term. Like I have so many former employees who have come and done bigger and better things after they worked with me. And to see where they are today and where they're working in big tech, they're working elsewhere. But I think sometimes somebody needs to take a chance, especially if you don't look like everybody else that's coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, I've struggled with that a lot in my career, with folks wanting me to do extra things in terms of like extra proving because I didn't have a formal credential. And I used to take it very personally. And I think that one thing that I've really seen is you have to align yourself with organizations that feel welcoming. I've spent many years in many industries. I was in government for a really long time. I worked for all your favorite 3-letter agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, et cetera. As well as, been through like the Microsoft engine, and like Microsoft's culture just very, very bluntly just didn't feel like a fit for me. I felt like I was constantly proving myself. I had to constantly prove to people I could be professional. I had to constantly prove to folks that I could be, that I could close deals. And I'll never forget, there was one time I had a manager that I had this deal that I had tripled in value. And literally until the day the contract was signed, every day he was just like, I don't believe you. I don't think this is going to pull off. I don't think you've done it. I don't think this is going to happen. Whereas other folks who were shooting for the moon and were 100% going to fail, he supported. And so I think that a huge piece of it is aligning yourself with organizations whose culture matches. I wear my grill to every Google meeting. I get to wear pajamas to work if I want to. I can wear cartoon t-shirts, and that's a better alignment and a better fit for me and my personality. And so I really feel like when it comes to that, also something I've done is encourage my teammates to do the same and really come to work as their full self, so that we can continue to foster that culture as normal, as opposed to it being like, oh, that's just X, that's just how they are. But that everyone can feel like that, so that moving forward, it shifts the culture internally as well.
If I may add one thing about, especially people trying to break in or trying to move up the ladder, and this is sort of my own personal view, is that our self-worth has to be determined from within. Like if we wait for a promotion or a degree or a certification or a title to give us self-worth, like it will never come, because there'll always be something above me. I used to be in academia, and I used to say, okay, if I win this grant, I'll become a star, professor and this and that, whatever. But then every time I made that, somebody will tell me, oh, you're not enough. You don't have a Nobel Prize, you don't have an Oscar, you don't have a Grammy. I'm like, listen, man, I'm a professor, I'm not a rapper. Like, why are you expecting me to win a Grammy? Like, but that's how they just keep moving the target for you. And that's why it's really, really important for people trying to break into data science to not attach your self-worth to this external thing, this job, this title, this degree, and never feel that I will be happy, I will be accomplished when I get X, whatever that is. Degree, job, promotion, etc. Because I can tell you, I've tried all of them. I've run the rat race for a really long time, and it's not it. So as much as AI is cool, like you want to find your calling, and some of you on this call are really driven towards AI, and you definitely have to pursue it. But for others that maybe are going because it's the flavor of the month, like just dig deep into your own self-worth and what you want to pursue, and don't just go through all this trauma and all this trouble if it's not what you really aspire to do.
All right, that was so great. Thank you so much. We do have to wrap up now. We are at time. I just want to, mention Albert's comment about mental health and how it impacts, industries and technology. Maybe we will have another session solely based around that. But on that note, thank you so much, James. Thank you so much, X. This has been such a engaging conversation and, a great place to start. We are going to go into our second breakout room now. So I think Tracy is going to take over. But once again, thank you so much for your time today. Hi, Tracy.
Hi. Great conversation. Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to, because of time, we're going to move kind of swiftly into our next breakout. But I have to pause because that last statement about self-worth hit me, right? It's like, that's so important. And no matter, what you're doing, where you are, that may be very difficult to have that, especially if you're feeling unappreciated, unqualified, an outsider, and, not in a community that's cultivating your talent or even seem like that they want you there. So that is a huge challenge, but it's really an essential thing to have self-worth. And another thing, what I really loved, and I believe X said it, is about, having different perspectives and different ethnicities and cultures and races does not then ergo automatically translate to a diverse product or diverse system, which is cultivating a product that is representative, right, of a diverse community. And so how are we still, even when we say diverse teams, what does that mean? And just because you're in the room, does that actually change the product? And I think that that's a really a question that we have to answer. And it's very critical, because then you don't want to just say, oh, I have so many Black people or Latino people or Asian people on the team. But is it actually impacting? Do they have any kind of decision-making power? Is there any type of power to move things or to make decisions? And that is really, really important. And another thing is community and company culture. Making sure that you're in a community that's cultivating you, or as a company creating that, and always just trying to really analyze and look at that over and over again. I think that that's so important. And really even the hiring practices, how are you thinking about hiring? Because of course, if you don't have opportunity to build your resume, to get the internships at Facebook or the Googles or the Microsofts, and then to get the next job and the next job, to build a resume where someone can look at you and say, oh, you're worthy, then you have a problem. And so there you have the diversity issue not being solved, right? Because now you have, it's like the Olympics. You have to jump through all these hoops, but there's all these boundaries and challenges that you can't really overcome in order to get to a point where somebody thinks you're good enough, you're worthy enough, you're acceptable enough. And so we're going to pay you, embrace you, and cultivate you in our company. So all of these things are so important, and we have to continue to think about those things. As we do that, I want to do another poll question right before, just really quickly, we go into the breakout, because I know we don't have as much time. But the next poll question, and you just go to the right, and you would see in the chat, and the poll questions are: 1, hiring and building a more diverse AI teams. What do you think are the most pressing challenges to creating equitable AI? I should say that first. So what's more important? Hiring and building more diverse AI teams, creating more robust and representative data sets, educating the public more about AI, external regulations for the tech industry, and lastly, creating new opportunities for those displaced by AI. So I'll give you a minute or two just to quickly answer those questions. And you just hit polls in your event space. And I'll just read it one more time. Hiring and building more diverse AI teams, creating more robust and representative data sets, educating the public more about AI, external regulation for the tech industry, and creating new opportunities for those displaced by AI. Okay, I'm just going to read it really quickly. Hiring and building more diverse AI teams, 48.1%. Creating more robust and representative data sets, 21.4%. Educating the public more about AI, 7.1%. External regulation for the tech industry, 14.3%. And then creating new opportunities for those displaced by AI, 10%. Great, thank you. They're still coming in, but thank you so much for that. We're going to move into our next breakout. We just have about roughly 15 minutes for the breakout, so you'll go to the session. And again, we're going to be using the Miro board in order to do some brainstorming. And please go to the link in the chat so that you can get back to the handout. And in that handout, it has the link. But there's also a list of considerations. And I'm just going to read the headings. It says, consider the way that sensors can often have a difficult time detecting darker skin or certain eye types properly, or whether language models are able to detect, all accents. So AI literacy and explainability, societal displacement, control and regulation, diverse teams, and STEM education. So let's head over to our sessions now. They're live, and see you soon. Thank you so much.